be talking about distributed CI with Radicle and Ambient. And I will be explaining the words. There's a QR code that has the source code to my slides, if anyone wants those. The QR code has the URL, that's also there. I assume all of you know what CI is. It is an acronym for continuously irritating. Yes. Continuous integration is one of the fundamental ways in which software is developed these days. It did not happen when I started in 1984, but there you go. I will be talking about what Radicle is and how CI works with Radicle. I will start with a short demo and a hopefully short rant about GitHub. I don't have a lot of time, so I will be keeping it today. And the goal for me today is to introduce the high-level concepts and the ideas of the things I make, not to teach you how to use Radicle or Radicle CI. 1 hour is not enough for that. If you leave this talk with an informed decision of whether you want to look into this stuff further, then I have succeeded. The demo. I have it somewhere here. Moment. I have this all set up, but then we switch laptops and everything is difficult. There we go. So on the left-hand side you have a terminal, and on the right-hand side you have the Radicle CI log file or output. Maybe a little change. I'm making it so that I can trigger CI. Okay. This fails. I will instead show you a run log file that I have prepared before, which is here. And this is what the run log currently looks like when used with Ambient. And you can click open these successful things and see that yes, there was an actual message there. The plan for the CI here is very simple. It writes out a message. I could also run this locally, if I know how to type. I still don't know how to type. So this runs Radicle, CI and Ambient entirely locally. You don't need any network access. My computer currently does not have network access. And it will hopefully happen in a few seconds, but sometimes it takes a minute. Okay, this takes more than a few seconds. Let's continue. I promise you it will work. That was the marvelous demo. GitHub is something I'm sure all of you know. GitHub is a centralized service. as a centralized service, it is both vulnerable and evil. Some centralized services are only one of these. The principle is very general, but given the topic of today, I'm going to be talking about GitHub specifically. When I say vulnerable, I mean that if someone doesn't like GitHub, they can attack one place and GitHub goes down. I'm not saying that anyone does that, but if someone wanted to do that, they could do that. That means that GitHub itself is vulnerable, but also everyone who uses GitHub is vulnerable, because when GitHub goes down, software development in the world tends to stop. I don't like that, because this is so centralized, so popular, so everyone basically depends on GitHub with very few exceptions. But it's a problem for everyone because GitHub goes down a lot. Also, GitHub could be evil. It's owned by Microsoft, which is well known to be a company run by people with high moral character. Otherwise, they could do things like take all of the code and other information that's stored on GitHub and use that for their own purposes. Or they might decide to say, deny access to anyone who's in Iran. That happened years ago, but that has changed. It might happen again. GitHub and Microsoft are headquartered in the United States. They are therefore under the wings of US government leadership, which might or might not be a good thing. I could go on for a long time, but I don't have all the time. Radicle is one way to avoid the centralization problem for version control systems. Radicle takes Git, which is also already distributed, and adds social artifacts like issues and pull requests that we call patches, and stores all of these in the Git repository, not next to the Git repository, which means that if you have a clone of the Git repo, you have everything. Because it's distributed, it's also things like authenticating that this is the repo you want does not happen by location. It happens via cryptographic signatures, which turns out to be a more secure way than looking at the URL and seeing github.com. Radicle development is funded and guided by a Swiss non-profit foundation called Better Internet Foundation. They collected money some years ago using a cryptographic coin called RAD, and they used that for some governance as well. Radicle software has no cryptographic technology. It is purely cryptography. The reason why Radicle exists is because centralization is bad. Centralization makes it possible to say that you have this repository, it would be a shame if something happened to that. And Radicle tries very hard to make it so that you are in control, nobody can prevent you. That doesn't mean that just because you have a Radicle repository, you can force anyone else to have a copy of it. They also have autonomy and sovereignty and self-governance. The way Radicle works is everyone who uses Radicle runs a node. That's a program in the Radicle ecosystem. Running a node is about as difficult as running SSH agents, which I hope most of you are running. Basically, you start the Radicle node and it's there. You don't, unless we make a bug in the code, you don't ever have to deal with that. Radicle supports Tor, so we can talk to other nodes over Tor, and there's support for other protocols as well. From a user point of view, the node you run is your Git server. So you pull from there, you clone from there, and you push there. And your node then talks to other nodes over a gossip protocol and the Git protocol. The gossip protocol is used between nodes to say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I have heard that there exists this node so-and-so, and they have these repositories. The Git protocol is for transferring actual changes to repositories because the Git protocol is very performant, and there's no point in reinventing it. This all works reasonably well, and although many of the things are quite complicated because centralized systems are easier, this works well enough that it can be used. There are clients for the command line and web and desktop, slightly varying capabilities depending on the user experience, but it's there. Radicle CI is what I specifically work on myself. Every node in the Radicle network can opt into running CI for whatever repositories they want. Nobody forces you to run CI. It's your computer, you decide. That is fundamental to the design. Radicle CI is also, as I tried to show, local first, but sometimes I have trouble with QM. And it has continuous integration in the meaning that you can run a build and tests. And delivery, depending on the CI engine you use, and deployment as well, if you choose a suitable engine. Basic CI stuff for anyone who's used to, say, GitHub Actions. The reason why Radicle CI exists is because everyone who writes code needs it. This is fairly universally accepted in the software development industry. The goal is that eventually, if I have a little more time to develop this, it will be the preferred way of doing CI. But for now, if it works at all, I'm already successful. If you use a centralized CI system, you're usually using shared resources, which means that you're competing on those resources with others. If you work for an organization and they provide the resources, there might still be 1,000 people who want to use the same machine. And that can mean long queues. With Radicle CI, you can set things up so that you use your own hardware as the developer, so you don't have to wait, which is quite practical. The specific goals for Radicle CI is to support software development on Radicle. It also works for any other use of CI that fits in the same shape, so there's some source files and you do some automated processing and you might produce some output files and there might be some tests and stuff to run and it all works. The needs and wants of people who actually use Radicle is what guides Radicle CI development. I'm trying I'm the one who currently develops this. It is not a goal for me or the project to compete with all the features on every other CI system. Microsoft has thousands of people working on GitHub Actions. Although I am the greatest programmer who ever will have existed, I have to sleep. So I can't compete with that, but I can make something that's nice to use. We also don't care to be properly incompatible with existing systems, because that would make it harder for us to develop this. This is an example, slightly abbreviated example of a Radicle CI configuration. Yes, it's YAML, because it's always YAML. But you defined one or more adapters that I will explain in a moment. And then you define when these adapters should be used. There is a Boolean expression in the filters field that if this evaluates the true for a change that's coming in, then CI runs. And there's a whole bunch of conditions you can put, and it's up to you and your Boolean expressive skills. The way this works is that the Radicle node has a Unix domain socket that the component I developed called the CI broker, or SIB. It listens to the socket, and every time the node sends an event saying that I have fetched these references in this repository, then SIB looks at those, applies the filters on the previous slide, and maybe runs CI. Running CI means that it runs a separate program called the adapter, and there can be any number of adapters. And the adapter gets some JSON as input that specifies the change to run on, produces some JSON output, and in between it can do whatever it wants. This is an example of the inputs and outputs. They're supposed to be all on one line, but the slide is too narrow to fit the first one on one line. But it's very simple JSON, and as long as it uses these messages, then the adapter can do whatever it wants. This would be most of the code that needs to be implemented in an adapter. I've left out the code that parses the JSON, but it prints the first message saying that I have now started running, and this run has this ID. And then it uses artificial intelligence to decide whether the run succeeds. And then outputs either a success or a failure message. This is obviously a joke. A read adapter would take the if random line and replace that with something actually useful. But I wanted a joke example. We have a bunch of existing adapters for running CI locally. Native CI just runs shell commands on the hosts, which is a little dangerous. But it's a simple one for development purposes. Container CI uses containers for isolation, and we have Richard here who wrote container CI. You can talk to him afterwards. Ambient is what I wrote, and I will be talking about that in a moment. And then there's adapters for a bunch of other CI systems by others, and yes, we also support GitHub Actions. We do that because a lot of people are using GitHub Actions, and they might not want to switch everything to Radicle, and they might want to use free compute from Microsoft for running CI. Okay, I want to check that I have an answer to this very important question. Raise your hand if you have ever been on an airship or would like to be. Cool. This was to make sure that you're all awake. Ambient is the CI engine I started writing even before I heard of Radicle. The purpose of Ambient is to make it safe and secure for me or anyone else to run CI on other people's code. I have a number of friends whom I trust completely, and I know they're very competent. I entirely trust that they will not put any malicious in their code. But they have dependencies, that have dependencies, that have dependencies, that have dependencies. When you go 3 or 4 levels down, nobody will be reliable enough to verify that they all are good. Ambient makes this easier. It runs things in such a way that if there's malicious code, it can't do anything bad. The way Ambient works is that it takes all the code that is in the project under test, that is running CI for, and runs all of that in a virtual machine that has no network access, that has no access to host resources, has no access to any secrets and passwords and keys of the hosts. It has a clean, fresh VM for every run. It can do whatever it wants inside, but it has only so much CPU, RAM, disk, and runtime. And maybe it could do a probe hammer attack and try to extract keys from the host, but otherwise, no. Or at least I claim it though. I have much hubris. Obviously, if code runs in a VM without network access, it can't download things like dependencies. So the project describes the dependencies it needs, and Ambient downloads them before the VM starts. Likewise, if the CRM produces artifacts that need to be published or deployed, then Ambient can do that after the VM stops. The VM runs under QEMU because I like QEMU, and it doesn't require any kind of libvirt or any other infrastructure to run and manage the VMs. This is most of the CI plan for Ambient itself. It's missing a couple of steps because the slide got too large, but this would work. The missing steps build a Debian package. The pre-planned section is for actions that run before the VM starts. Post-plan is after the VM stops. These are restricted. Only such actions are allowed there that I have vetted and or others have vetted that make sure that those actions can't do anything bad. The actions in the actual plan section can do whatever they want. They run in the VM. The VM guarantees the isolation. You can run arbitrary shellcode, and it runs as root because sometimes things need to be root. And it's fairly simple. Again, it's YAML because it's always YAML. I prefer to write YAML over writing JSON by hand, but there you go. Status quo of Radicle and Radicle CI and Ambient is that we heavily eat our own dog food. Since a couple of years ago, Radicle is developed on Radicle. So if Radicle stops working, then all the Radicle developers start panicking. But we try to be careful about making releases that don't break things for other people. Also, Ambient is using Ambient for CI and Radicle CI for CI, because dog food is yummy. There is some actual real use of Radicle, not yet huge amounts because fairly new, and it's not easy to just switch. I've done switches between, say, GitLab and I forgot Germany, but also a bit Further, yes. That switch is fairly easy. Radicle is, due to the fact that it's entirely decentralized, a bit harder, which prevents some people from migrating or even trying. But on the left, there's a graph that has active daily active nodes, so there's a few hundred active nodes, and Radicle developers don't run that many nodes, so these are real people. On the right-hand side is a graph that shows use of Radicle CI. So every time Radicle CI runs a plan, that goes up. I have excluded from that graph all the nodes I developed this software, so occasionally I decide that I have made some changes. Let's see if my stuff still works. And I have about 100 Radicle repositories, so I run CI on all of those. And that makes the graph go up, but not this graph because excluded. It is not, like I said, we are not quite as popular as GitHub, but we are also new. On the graph, on the right-hand side, the x-axis is number of days since I started measuring this. The y-axis is number of runs, and the font is a little small, and I couldn't figure out how to make it larger, but it's just under 10,000 at the top end. The Better Internet Foundation has owns a German company called Monadic that develops a service called Radicle.garden. That's an actual domain name. It came as a surprise to me. That garden is a TLD. The purpose of Radicle.garden is to provide an always-on Radicle node and eventually provide CI there. The audience for this is mainly companies who would be willing to pay €5 a month rather than pay an employee to figure this out and set it up. All the software that runs Radicle.garden is open source, it's on Radicle, and it has no lock-in. Everything is in your Radicle repository. If you want to move elsewhere, you clone that and push it somewhere else. Done. But if you want a really easy way to have a Radicle node, then that would be it. I would like you to take a few things away here. You don't have to submit to the big tech companies that provide services like GitHub. Whether you think that, say, Microsoft would ever be evil and do harm to you, you might want to prepare for that situation if it ever happens. And it's better to prepare before it happens, because we have seen just the past 2 weeks what happens if you do it afterwards. Even though most of the tech press claims that it's not possible to fight against Microsoft and Amazon and Oracle and Meta and so on, it's possible. Trust me. And you might want to help other people as well. Radicle makes it feel easy for you to provide things like CI capacity for others. And if you decide that Radicle is too radical, you might go for something else, your own self-hosted Forjo or whatever it might be. That's good. The Radicle project is not in competition with Forjo, but with centralized systems that are big and evil. And thank you. I want to explain the fox. Ambient started when my British friends Daniel and Rob were visiting me in Helsinki, and we had breakfast at an all-day breakfast restaurant called Lazy Fox. And that's why there's a fox there. Now, questions?
Questions?
Hello. I just want to know what kind of hardware, if you want to host a node in your own living room, what kind of hardware would you require?
What have you got?
5, 6 Raspberry Pi.
That's enough. The Radicle node requires very little hardware capacity. I think it's tens of megabytes of RAM when it runs, and except when we make a mistake in the code, it doesn't really use CPU or network very much. You need disk space for all the repositories, but that's hard to work around. But a Raspberry Pi should work just fine.
Yes, thank you. I was curious how you balance things, because you want to, in your use case, run the CI job without network access. So you do some preparation in the host with vetted commands, as you say. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about how you balance those things, like the risk of running things in the host versus the benefits of running the CI without network access.
That is a really, really good question, and I was hoping nobody would ask. The way I do this is by carefully reviewing the code that is in a pre or post action to make sure it doesn't run any code from the repository under test. Because if that happens, then we get it home. If I make a mistake, that's a problem. I have some plans for how to work around that, which involve more virtual machines. But at the moment, as long as I am perfect, it's fine. You can help me be perfect by telling me all the ways in which I'm not. And yes, I am making a joke. I know I'm not perfect. This is a thing you learn when you write programs for over 40 years. You are not perfect, but neither is anyone else.
I have a practical question. So let's say companies that now suddenly have a lot of new people vibe coding, and you need to set up some secure way to build and test what they are making. How much work do you think it would be for a company to train someone to be able to set up and maintain such a system?
So if I understand correctly, how much work would it be to set up and maintain a Radicle node, possibly several, and Radicle CI, and say Ambient, because that's the one I operate? I would say it's less than a week to learn. It might go faster if you hire someone to do training for that, but people have started from about scratch and followed our guides and gotten things running in less than a week. Unless, of course, you're me and it takes months, but my brain is of an older model and learns slowly. You have a question? Yeah?
Hello. It's about the question that was asked previously. So let's assume I have some hardware and I want to help out the community by running CI for patches that are submitted, for example, kernel. How hard is it to actually set it up? Again, it's very similar to the previous question. And also, are there any known drawbacks really?
Setting this up would be, I find it not too hard, but some of this is not well documented. The CI parts are not well documented, which is my fault. And you can come to our Zulip and tell me that I need to know this thing, and you will ask me questions and I will know what documentation for it. Overall, the Radicle developers seem to be very friendly, but we are also not many. So if we suddenly have 10 million users, then we will not have time for anything. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Are there any drawbacks that are compared to the well-known established CI?
Yes. Radicle itself and Radicle CI and Ambient are relatively fresh software, which means that every time someone starts using them in a new way or at a scale not before tried, we find problems. We work on these problems, so I will not despair of the future. But if you suddenly want to do things like import 40 terabytes of data into Radicle, which then gets replicated among a lot of other nodes, that might not work so well. But give us time. And most importantly, tell us and help us by letting us know what you need.
Hi. I wonder how does it work if you want to add support for another CI system?
Then you write an adapter.
Okay, so that's my own project.
Yes. Writing an adapter, the jokey shell script I showed has all the important parts from Radicle CI perspective. Depending on the CI system you want to support with the adapter, that might be arbitrarily more complicated. But as an example, I wrote a prototype adapter for Jenkins in shell in about 100 or 120 lines. I would not recommend anyone try using that because shell, but if the CI system is reasonably sane, it's not difficult to write an adapter.
Okay, excellent. And just a small question, also another. Under what license do you ship?
An excellent question, and I have the answer somewhere here. I think Radicle itself is, and Radicle CI and Ambient are dual license between MIT and Apache 2. It's documented in the source repositories, but that's my memory. There's a question on row 3.
So I add a node that I host in my living room to the network. How can anybody run CI jobs on that node in the network? And how do you prevent a malicious user from queuing up a billion jobs in the network?
At the moment, they can only run CI if you allow that for a repository.
Okay. I need to allow it per repository then.
Yeah, but let me go back to this configuration file. This specified when the Radicle CI broker triggers a CI run. And if you can have a condition there that it has to be a repository with this ID, and that means that only for that repository. That doesn't protect you if someone makes a ton of patches for that repository, and each one triggers CI to run. If you could message me in some way or send email, I will open a ticket for that and make sure it can be controlled.
So my question is more political. I think this is a great idea to be out of the centralized way of writing code. Is there any support that you could get from like European Union? Like, is there some movement? Because like, okay, big tech American companies are capturing this. Is there a way to push the movement a bit further to get like support from the EU? Because yeah, it's Switzerland, but
I hope there is, but I don't know. I know that there's some funding from the EU via NLF or NLF. They give money to NLF, the foundation, to give the project. And there's things like the Sovereign Tech Fund, I think, which I don't know any details of, but there are at least some attempts on this. It is puny compared to the resources of big tech companies, but it's something. And given that all open source developers are wicked smart, we don't need all the resources that stupid centralized systems need. That was a joke. Mostly a joke.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Hello. So how agnostic is your own CI to what runs inside QEMU? I'm a BSD guy, that's why I'm asking.
Excellent question. I have only used Debian, but Ambient, one of the reasons I chose QEMU specifically is that it doesn't care. QEMU emulates a PC or other machine, and anything that's in any operating system that can boot in QEMU should work. Ambient has some extra requirements that I would love to work with BSD people so that I can use BSD images with Ambient. The main restriction there is that Ambient doesn't try to log in to the VM and run commands there, because that was difficult. I know that from previous experience. Like, how do you recognize that you are at a login prompt reliably? It usually works, and you could do SSH and stuff, but what happens is the VM should run Windows that doesn't have a login prompt. So Ambient requires the VM to do certain things on boot up so that the CI run actually runs, and I'm happy to talk through those in very much detail, but not in the next 30 seconds. I'm easy to find on the internet, and as soon as I get my jacket, you can come and ask me for a business card.
Thank you.
Thank you.